Awesome. I see some names of friends, people who have been here in the past. It's great to see you again. And we've got a few new names, a lot of folks that I don't know. So thank you for joining us and checking out what our Trust Matters webinars are all about. Now, for those of you who are game, I'd like to invite you to turn on your cameras so that we can see each other as we go through this. Good morning. And don't worry about the way you look. This working from home thing has done one thing for us all. It's got us a little less worried about our appearance on a day-to-day basis. All right. So we've still got folks coming into the waiting room, so we'll give it another 30 seconds. I think this is going to be a fairly intimate group. So throughout, as you get questions, feel free to either enter them in the chat or even just come off mute and ask your questions directly. I will pause a couple of times during the presentation specifically for questions. And if we get too much background noise, our trusty associate Tracy will go ahead and mute everybody back up. All right. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Noelle Mykolenko. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO of Trusted Advisor Associates. And today we're going to talk about 10 mantras to reset your trust mindset for 2021. So just a few notes before we get started. This webinar is being recorded. If you prefer not to be part of a recorded webinar, feel free to drop now. We will send out links to the recording, the presentation deck itself, and some helpful resources after the webinar. So even if you can't stay for the whole thing today, you'll have a chance to take a look at what you might have missed. As I already mentioned, if you're game, turn on your cameras. It's great to see each other and really know who we're talking with and sharing the experience with. We will be using polling and chat features throughout the presentation. We'll also be using a tool called annotation, which I'll explain to you how to access that when we get to the right points. And if you do have any questions, raise your hand. You can go down to the control bar at the bottom and access your hand raise, or just type them into the chat. And as I mentioned, I'll pause at a couple of points during the presentation specifically to take questions, but don't wait until then. If a question comes to you, go ahead and throw it in the chat and we'll get to it. So let's get started. Trusted Advisor Associates, for those of you who are new to us, we've spent over 20 years helping business professionals build strong trust relationships. Our work is founded on 3 books: The Trusted Advisor, which was originally published in 2001. And we are very excited to have the 20th anniversary edition coming out next month of The Trusted Advisor. After that, Charlie Green, who's one of the co-authors of the original Trusted Advisor, went on to write Trust-Based Selling, and then collaborated with his co-author, Andrea Howe, who those of you who are looking at your participants is in our group today, to write the Trusted Advisor Field Book. I'm going to be drawing from content in the Trusted Advisor Field Book and the Trusted Advisor for our conversation today. So if you want to learn more about what we're talking about, go ahead and grab one of those books, or wait another week and you can get the new 20th anniversary edition of the Trusted Advisor. So as we get started, since we're still in January, I figured I could get away with this question. I just want to hear from some of you about what New Year's resolutions you made for 2021. If you're game, share one of your New Year's resolutions. Just access that chat that's down in your main bar and chat to everyone, so we can see what some of the commitments you made to yourself for the new year are. Let's see what's coming in. We've got a few folks coming in. Reading a book a month. An intention, not a resolution. I love that. We've got lots of hellos from everybody. It's great to see you all here. Adapt. Adam. Nice. Some folks who haven't done it, a lot about compassion, a lot about learning, reading more, accepting reality. Great. I think that 2020 gave us all a really good opportunity to stop and reevaluate what's important to us. And we all had a lot more time to think about what we might do. So an interesting fact, oh wait, I'll get to that in a second. How long, and thinking back on past years, how long do you typically keep your resolutions? Now, here's where we're going to use this annotation. If you move your mouse, your cursor, up to the top of your screen, it'll bring down a drop menu. And if you click on that menu called Options, you'll see one for Annotate. I want you to open your annotation pane and choose a stamp. Okay, there we go. So some folks are already figuring that out. I want you to stamp, now give me a second to ask the question, for how long you typically keep your resolutions. Do you keep them the full year or until you've achieved them? Do you usually get about halfway through the year? Or maybe you make the first quarter, you're still going strong? Or how many of you, like me, I'm ashamed to admit, barely make it a month with my resolutions? Great. So go ahead and just kind of generally give us an idea of where you last. So it looks like we've got some folks who are really committed and make it all the way through the full year. But the bulk of people are coming in kind of in this first quarter to 6 months. Yeah. Now the good news for those of us who are down here on the right with just about 1 month, or maybe in that between 1 month and 3 month, the good news for us, let me go ahead and clear these. Tracy, I'm going to ask you to clear it because I seem not to be able to. There we go. You're in good company, because it turns out that 80% of New Year's resolutions fail by the second week of February, right? That's 6 weeks with our really good intentions of all of these fantastic things that we want to do to improve ourselves. And most of us barely make it 6 weeks with that. And so I started thinking about that and curious about why that happens. I did a little bit of research on the internet, right? That fantastic resource we all have. And it turns out that there are a number of reasons. Everything from we're not specific enough to we take a negative aspect. Maybe it's something that we don't like about what we're doing versus something we want to do better. But one thing came through clearly in all of them, and it has to do with connecting the change in behavior to the mindset that you hold. Right? So what is a mindset? A mindset is simply that collection of thoughts and beliefs that determine how we respond to events and information. Right? It's all those things that help shape our thoughts around what's happening to us or what's happening around us. How do we understand the events as they're unfolding? How do we process them? What's our assessment of whether it's a good event or a negative event, right? How do we perceive the intention of the other person or perceive what the impact may be to us? Those are all the thoughts that drive how we assess an event or some information. As a result of those thoughts, we react with emotions. Right? We may be fearful of something that we perceive to be a threat. We may be excited or confident about something that we feel like, man, we've really got this. Or we might be curious. We might be interested to know more. We don't really perceive it as a threat or as a really positive thing. We're kind of neutral on it. As these emotions occur within us, that's really what drives the actions that we take in response. Right? So we may choose to interact, for example, if we are interested or curious to know more. We may choose to interact to forward something, right? A good positive event that's happening. We might decide that we want to avoid it altogether. The flight or fight instinct kicks in. We might be confrontational. All of these things are driven by our mindset and what we think about a situation, how that makes us feel. That's what drives how we respond to it. To change your behavior, right, first you have to change your mindset. And this is both a good news and a bad news story. And I'll start off with the bad news. The bad news is that changing your mindset is fairly simple. It's not always easy. Carol Dweck wrote a book a number of years ago about mindsets. And for anybody who's curious to learn more about mindset and how to change your mindset, kind of a deeper dive, I recommend her book on it. Now, the good news is that it only takes two things. It takes awareness. You need to be able to break down how your thoughts are impacting your emotions and how that's driving your behavior. And in fact, I would do it from the reverse. Recognize the behavior that you instinctively go towards, identify the emotion that's driving that behavior, and then identify what it is that you're thinking about the situation or how you're perceiving the situation to figure out how to change it. The second piece is intentionality. You simply have to be intentional about changing your perception, your emotions, or the actions you take. The actions you take are the easiest thing to change once you've identified what your thoughts and feelings are. The second piece of good news here is that it's entirely within your control. You can choose how you feel about a situation. You can choose what you think about what somebody else has done. So you have great personal agency to shift your mindset, which is that core element of being able to make lasting behavior change in a positive direction. Now, to found this in trust, right? Because we're not just talking generally about mindsets, and I am certainly not somebody who is qualified to help you lose weight, quit some of your bad habits, suddenly learn how to run a marathon, right? Putting this back in the context of trust, I want to introduce you to 5 fundamental truths about trust. And these come from chapter 1 of the Trusted Advisor Field Book. For any of you who have not seen the book already or read the book, again, and I'm not sure why I'm in shameless promotion mode here, but it has these truths. It has a ton of really helpful information for you as you navigate building deeper trust relationships. I want to highlight 5 of these. First of all, trust is personal. We often think that trust can be associated with an organization, or we give up our personal agency around building trust relationships because we think that our clients or our colleagues have a perception that is so deep set about our organization, our business unit, the company where we work, right? And so we give up that agency that we have and our control over our ability to build trust because we say, well, they just think this. Most of the time, when we think about trust related to either an organization or a brand, it's really more of reputation. When we're talking about trust, we're talking about the trust that exists between people. I may trust Amazon to deliver my packages on time, right? I trust them to be reliable using one of the 4 elements of trustworthiness from the trust equation. I don't necessarily trust them to babysit my kids or to always tell me the truth, right? Amazon as an organization doesn't have the ability to create personal trust with me. So that's the first fundamental truth. That's the first thing that you can think about that might change your mindset. As a person, you should be looking to develop trust with other people. The second fundamental truth I want to highlight is that trust is about relationships. Now, some of you are probably saying, come on, that's pretty basic. Obviously, trust is about relationships. But think about it. We in professional services in particular tend to overemphasize a couple of aspects of trustworthiness. We like to rely on our credibility, our expertise, right? Or our reliability, our always coming through with the commitments that we make. If we focus solely on those, and they tend to be fairly self-driven, we're almost removing ourselves from the relationship. It becomes more about just us and our drive to be trustworthy versus truly being the relationship. our drive to be trustworthy, and our ability to interact with somebody else who will then be willing to take the risk to trust us. Trust requires that two things happen. One person is willing to take the risk to trust the other, and that other person will demonstrate that they are trustworthy. Only when those two things happen in a relationship does trust exist. And that brings me to the third fundamental truth. Trust is created in interactions. There's this myth out there that building trust takes time. In fact, it doesn't take time. What it takes is the opportunities to interact in a way that we can demonstrate our trustworthiness and make it okay for the other person to take the risk to trust us. Pause for a moment and think for yourselves about a deep trust relationship that you have with someone. And think about someone that you really trust, right? Get that person in your mind. Now try to identify why it is that you trust them or when that trust occurred. And whether you just met the person or you've known them for 20 or 30 years, maybe your whole life, most likely what will occur to you is that there are moments in time, moments of truth in which that person demonstrated that you could rely on them, that they get you, that they have your best interest at heart, right? It's those interactions that we have. So if you're looking to build trust, you can't sit behind a computer and just create content. You can't rely, again, solely on that credibility and put yourself out there as someone who can be trusted. You have to have the interactions. Now, one thing that follows if trust is created in interactions is that it requires a certain amount of risk on your part. It's not just the person who's taking the risk to trust someone who um, who's taking the risk. You, as the person who's trying to create a trust relationship, also have to be willing to take some risks, demonstrate that you're vulnerable, that you're open to sharing information about yourself, tell a difficult truth, right? Um, Admit if you don't know the answer to something. These are things, again, when we're talking about professional services in particular, these feel very risky for us because we always want to look like we know what's going on. We have the answer to everything. We always want to be of service to our client. And so we're constantly at odds with our own human tendency to show up well in a moment of truth. Sometimes it takes being aware that it's an opportunity to take a risk, to drive the trust up even higher. Now, the fifth fundamental truth about trust is that you get what you give. Just like so many important relationships in our lives, if you are willing to put yourself into a trust relationship, if you're willing to trust the other person, most often they will reciprocate by trusting you back. If you're willing to take a risk, they'll reciprocate by being willing to take a risk with you, right? So all of these five fundamental truths, if you really start thinking about them and use these as guideposts to help you change how you perceive what's happening around you, these are foundational to a trust-based mindset. Now, I want to ask you to weigh in on this. Which of these most impacts your mindset? I know I went through them pretty quickly, but Tracy's going to put up a poll. And if you would just choose the one that is most impactful for you as we launch into 2021. We'll leave this poll up for about 30 seconds. So go ahead and select one. Interesting. All right, Tracy, let's show the answers to that. All right, so the majority, or the one that came out the highest, is that trust is created in interactions, right? And that's, I'm not surprised that that's what's most impactful for a lot of you, because there is this lasting tendency to think that if I just am smart and know what I'm doing and demonstrate my expertise, of course they'll trust me. Why wouldn't they? And so I invite you to flip that lens around, right? And think about somebody that you don't know very well. You might be able to go online and look at their LinkedIn profile. Maybe you've been to their webpage, so you have a pretty good idea of what they do, right? You know that they're experts. How willing are you to really trust them before you've had an interaction? Right? Especially when so much of what we're learning about people comes through online, where we don't control the information that we're receiving. We don't have a lot of good ways to verify it. We have to have that interaction. So great. Thank you very much. Let's see. I'm gonna pause there for a second and just ask, does anyone have any questions? I don't think I've seen anything come through in the chat. Tracy, correct me if I missed something. But if anyone wants to come off mute and ask questions about the mindset or those fundamental truths. Try to get my chat back up here. All right. Oh, hey, Susan. Thanks for joining us. All right, let's go on then and let's get to the meat of this. And that's 10 mantras to reset your mindset. Okay. And I've divided these into two different areas. One is mantras to focus on the relationship, right? Based on that.
Noelle.
Hey, Tracy. Yeah.
A question did come in. A couple questions, actually.
Awesome. I was too fast to go on.
I know. Does it differ between different cultures? Derek Klein says that.
All right, we'll go back to the questions page. Derek, do those fundamental truths differ between different cultures? It's a fantastic question. Our experience suggests that it doesn't differ greatly, that those fundamental truths are fundamental across all the cultures. And where I get my information for that, and all full disclosure, we interact, most of our work is done in North America and Europe. So most of our experience is in North America and Europe, and a little bit over in the Asia Pacific region. So I'm not a cultural expert on this. What we do see is that those fundamental truths are apply across all of the cultures with which we interact, with which we engage. What does differ is the ways in which people in different cultures demonstrate those fundamental truths, right? So I'll take, for example, if you look in a lot of Southern European or South American cultures, where it's very typical to engage personally before starting a business meeting. Think about any place where you'd sit down and have a cup of tea, for example, in the Middle East, before you start talking about business. I know in South America, a few minutes of time is spent with talking about how's the family, how are things going, right? There's a lot of personal interaction prior to getting into the business. In a culture like that, when we talk about personal interaction, you kind of have to go a little bit further in taking personal risks and sharing something personal, because the bar is already set high. It's already a cultural norm. Does that answer your question? So the fundamental truths are the same. The way they're demonstrated differ by culture. And if you have follow-up questions, Derek, good. All right. Yes, thanks. Susan, given COVID, can we interact technologically? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I encourage anyone who's curious about that to look at the webinar that Andrea Howe and I did in November on the new 80-20 rule for virtual relationships. In fact, a lot of what we do virtually allows us to interact even more with people than we could before everybody was on virtual. We're in the same places, right? We're in LinkedIn, we're on online forums, and we're chatting with each other. So we've got better access, and more timely access. Now, that being said, Susan, it's a great question. Yes, we can interact technologically. The way in which we interact is going to be a little bit different. There are different things to think about when we're interacting through technology. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move into the 10 mantras. And my goal is to finish this up on time. We've got about 5 more minutes of content, and then I will stay on after the formal presentation for 15 minutes or so if anyone else has more questions or you want to talk more deeply about any of these. So as I mentioned, I split these mantras up into 2 different areas. One is mantras to help you focus on the relationship, right? To really be aware that this is about you and another person. The next 5 that I'll go through are to help you focus on taking risk. So mantras to focus on the relationship. And when I talk about a mantra, these are some phrases or things that you can just repeat to yourself as you're trying to set your trust mindset in place for the year, right? Continue to repeat these mantras to yourself when you're in a situation that might be new or it's different from something you've experienced before, to help you stay focused on that trust mindset, which will then change how you react emotionally and allow you to behave in ways that are more in line with how you want to be building trust relationships. So, mantra number 1, it's about the client. Right? All of those times when our self-orientation gets in the way and we're worried about how we're going to look and whether or not we sound smart, if you just drop all of that and let it go and remind yourself, it's not about me, it's about the client. All of those concerns become a lot less important and a lot less influential on your emotions and your behaviors. Number 2, I am not the center of the universe. I use this one all the time. Again, get out of your own head, right? Manage your self-orientation in a way that allows you to remember that everybody else is experiencing the same kinds of things that you are. They're worried about how they're doing with their virtual world. They're worried about their friends and family. They're worried about their own position, right? Number 3, assigning blame will trap me. Taking responsibility will empower me. Especially now that we're all virtual, accountability is kind of up in the air for a lot of people. We see managers who are micromanaging or forcing more tasks and more lists. Tell me what you did last week. Tell me how you used your hours, right? They're looking for accountability. If you can give up on the natural human tendency to want to skirt out, especially when something has gone wrong, and just take responsibility. It empowers you. And at the very least, it gives you the ability to then take charge of the situation and move in a better direction. It's a we game, not a me game. Again, we're in this together, and having that as central to your mindset makes so many things easier to encounter or easier to experience. Then finally, don't ever, ever tell a lie or shade the truth, no matter how big or how small. It's always tempting. If I'm late to a meeting, I know for me, it's always tempting to say, oh, boy, traffic was a bear today, right? That one obviously has gone out the window in the past year. But it's easy to just tell these little white lies because, again, sometimes it's uncomfortable to take accountability. But telling even a little lie or even a little shading of the truth casts everything that you do or say into doubt. Now, which one of these stands out? And let's go back to that annotating. And I just like for you to just put a little stamp next to one of these that stands out the most for you as you go forward. And while you're doing that, I'm going through some of these comments. I hope you're keeping up on the chat because they're fantastic. Yeah, Andrea, you're right. Number 1 and 2, Charlie's phrase, it's not about thinking less of yourself, but thinking about yourself less. Stu Waller, great tip. Use we as much as possible in emails or texts. Absolutely. I often do that. I'll go through an email and check how many times I use the word I guess the letter I. All right, well, good. So these are kind of all over the place, and I love it. It means that they're really resonating with a lot of you. Good. All right, Tracy, let's clear these out and we'll do the 5 mantras to focus on taking more risk. So this one, I love this one. The answer is a better question. Let me explain this for a minute. We have a tendency to want to, and again, especially in professional services, we always want to have an answer. And so when somebody says something, maybe they bring us a situation, it could be as simple as your significant other complaining about a rough day that they had. Rather than immediately jumping to solution or giving them an answer to something that, quite frankly, they may not even be looking for an answer, what about replacing that with a better question? Right? Think about exploring and being curious. And it takes risk because, again, most often in the workplace, we focus on always being the one to be right or always being the one to have the answer. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way. It's what we get paid to do. Sometimes the value that we bring is in helping others to explore instead. The problem is rarely what the client said it was at first. And I love this one. This one comes from David Maister, and it is so spot on. And again, be willing to take the risk and explore, push back a little bit. Don't just take what the client says at face value. Really help them. Sometimes they may not even understand that they haven't correctly framed the problem to begin with.
Excuse me, Noelle.
Yeah. Hey, Tracy.
Someone's asked you elaborate on how to frame questions appropriately by Radha Jabbar.
Oh, Radha, that in itself is a topic for a full hour plus webinar. I'd love to be able to. I'm going to refer you to the trusted advisor, to the book. There's a whole section on what we call the trust creation process. And framing is one of those steps. So, you know, how to frame questions appropriately. Sorry, I just relooked at that. You know, Radha, I know we've got some folks who are starting to drop off. I'm going to hold that question until we get through the next couple slides, and then I'll come back to it because we do have some really good ways to help you frame some questions.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you. So knowing the truth is better than not knowing it. And this has to do with especially any time that you have bad news to deliver or you need to tell somebody something negative. Just remember that it may not be fun, but they're better off knowing it rather than just blithely going along without knowing that there's something bad out there. Right? You can hope for what might be, but don't wish for what can't be. This has to do with sometimes you just have to give up on what your ideal is. And I'm not saying don't strive for everything that you can, right? Continue to hope for what might be and continue to push for all of those things that are in your control and to influence the best possible outcome. But if you get yourself so locked on to something that truly cannot occur, then you're never going to go anywhere, right? You'll give up the good for the sake of an unattainable ideal. And then finally, a point of view doesn't commit you for life, right? For anyone out there who is feeling uncomfortable about sharing what you think the next steps should be in a project or what you think about the answer to something, just remember you always have the opportunity to come back and say, wow, you know, now I'm a little better informed. And yeah, I've changed my point of view on that. So, but put yourself out there, take the risk of sharing your point of view to build trust. So I'm going to ask you again, just real quick with that annotation stamp, which one of these risk-taking mantras really stands out for you? You can hope for what might be. That one's popular. I see. Great. And the answer is a better question. Good. Those two were really popular. Hey, Tracy, will you grab a screenshot of this? Because I'm going to include this in the slides.
Yes.
And I'm going to think on that. That may be a worthwhile blog post. And then a few folks are coming in with the point of view doesn't commit you for life. Great. All right. Yeah, and Derek, wonderful point. All these mantras also apply internally. It's not just working with clients, it's just as effective with colleagues, with partners. Wonderful. All right. Good. Now we'll clear out those annotations and just a quick resource for you, 4 quick questions that will keep you on track, right? So if you aren't diligent in repeating these mantras, or if you run into a situation that one of these mantras doesn't really help you with, use these 4 questions. They're great. Pause, take a beat, and reevaluate questions. And it doesn't take a lot of time if you're really thinking about them, right? It's a split second for you to do this quick pulse check when you're in the middle of a meeting or a conversation, and your human instincts, your natural tendencies might be getting in the way of trust building. Who am I thinking about? What is the client or colleague or partner feeling about this? Who am I serving by my present approach? And what am I afraid of here? And if the answer to any of these questions isn't immediate or isn't what you think it should be to maintain that trust mindset, it's worthy of taking a pause and reevaluating how you're perceiving the world. What are those thoughts and emotions that are driving your actions? All right, I'm going to stop for questions. I'm going to come back to this actually in a minute because we're a couple minutes over time. And I do want to give you all a chance to share with each other and really nail down for yourself. If you wanted to think back on this webinar 6 months from now, what is your biggest takeaway? What's that one thing that you really want to remember? And then chat it to everyone. I'll give you a minute to think about that. Interesting. Thanks, Andrea. They go to work. Mindsets and mantras are more powerful. They go to work on your way of being. I love that. Yeah, Joel, that's a good takeaway. Yep. Taking risks. Susan. Huh. Yeah. And Jeannie. Great. You have to take risks. That's so important. Well, keep these coming. Keep putting them into the chats. I'm so excited to see all these wonderful takeaways. I want to just share with you that we have plenty of resources available to you on the Trusted Advisor website or via the Trusted Advisor website. And I especially want to point out that we have a wonderful webinar on February 10th, where I'm going to be interviewing 2 of the co-authors of the Trusted Advisor, Charlie Green, who also founded Trusted Advisor Associates, and Robert Galford. And we'll be talking about what has changed and what hasn't changed in trust building in the past 20 years since they originally wrote the Trusted Advisor. All right, as I mentioned, keep these takeaways coming in. These are fantastic. And as I mentioned, I'll stay on for about another 10 minutes if people have more questions. And Tracy, oh good, we've got that poll up. Just before you go, if you would take a minute and let us know how valuable you think this webinar was, and were we able to help you? Yeah, Derek, that trust and relationships created at touch points. Yeah, the touch point interactions. These are awesome. Kathy Johnson, intimacy and reduced self-orientation. There's someone who knows the trust equation. I love it. Oh, hey, Victoria. Trust is built in everyday interactions. Good. Ah, fantastic. These are just wonderful. All right, thank you all so much for your time and attention today. I'm here for you. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And Tracy, let's go ahead. We'll close that poll out. And I am going to stop sharing so we can see each other. What other questions or comments do you have? And for those of you who need to run, feel free to drop off at any time.
Noelle, we do have the question. I'm finding it from earlier.
Yeah, to talk about how to frame, how do
you
we
elaborate?
frame questions?
Right, how to frame questions appropriately by Radha.
Yeah, Radha, are you still on? Oh, good, you are. Hi,
Yes.
Radha.
Hi.
Thanks for the question. So that's great. And I'm just going to ask you, since I misread it the first time, can you clarify just a little bit? What is it that you're asking?
Well, so to go back to your point about instead of offering solutions right off the gate, maybe use exploratory questions. So I would like to see more of, or I would like to hear more examples of that, perhaps.
Sure. And I'm going to give you a tip or a technique that, for those of us who do tend to feel that our responsibility is really to offer solutions, it's a great technique to use to maintain credibility while also focusing on diving deeper in the question. So great starter phrase. I have a point of view on that. And before we get to that, could you tell me more? Or could you elaborate? Right? And so asking another question really just opens the door for the person who's asked you for an answer or asked you for something to think through for themselves. What is it that they're really asking? And what is it that they're really looking for? And that's where we start to see a shift in what the framing of the problem is, right? So,
Okay.
and it may be, if they've asked you a direct question, right? Obviously, if somebody says, how many years have you been doing this? Then the appropriate response is an answer. I've been doing this for 30 years, right? But if they're saying, we've got, our process isn't working well. We're finding that it's taking entirely too long to make our Flibberty gibbets. And rather than saying, oh, well, you should change your process here and here and here, you might say, that's interesting. I have a couple of ideas on that, but tell me more about what you're looking to do with the time it takes to make Flibberty gibbets.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Good, thank you.
Well, Jean had a question. What kind of risks do people find the most difficult to take?
Is it Jean or Jeannie? Jean, okay. Great, so what kind of risks? Tell me that again, because, oh, there we go. What kind of risks do people find the most difficult to take? Whatever feels riskiest for you, right? It's such a personal, and feel free to come off mute, Jean, if you want to. It's going to be different for everybody. I will say, for anyone who's really familiar with our work, with the trust equation, and for any of you who have not already taken your trust quotient, you can do a little mini free version on our website. What we do find is that whatever your strength in building trust is, that thing that you tend to lead with, for most people in professional services, it's either reliability or credibility. Whatever your strength tends to be, if that is called into question in any way, or if you're concerned about that strength being impacted in any way or perceived to be impacted, that tends to be the riskiest. So for example, for me, I tend to rely very heavily on my credibility when I'm building trust. If anybody suggests that I don't know what I'm talking about, or anything that I'm thinking about doing that may call my credibility into question, feels unbelievably risky to me. Other people might be more concerned that, like, they may lead more through connection or intimacy. For them, taking a risk that may have them be perceived as less likable would feel incredibly risky for them. So it's very personal what feels most risky. Does that answer your question, Jean?
Yeah, thanks. The reason I asked the question is most of my work is with lawyers, and they often lead with their expertise. So the intimacy side is their weak spot. So that's where they need the most work. And that's pretty touchy-feely from their perspective.
Absolutely. It is touchy-feely. And so when you look at their credibility, they tend to probably lead with their expertise, which is a combination of credibility and reliability. And so anything that is either creating an emotional connection, that intimacy that you identified, or taking a risk around something like suggesting a path forward when they're not absolutely certain, bringing a point of view when they don't have an airtight support for it. Those things would also potentially feel risky. Great.
I'm Joel Weber, speaking for one of the lawyers on the call. I echo what Jean Svikhart said and
Hi,
double
Joel.
down on it. Very pertinent.
Yeah, good.
It's huge. Can't be overstated.
How about, I know I have at least one more lawyer on the call. I'm looking for some kind of,
So I think you're talking about me, and I think that there is this, like you want to come out as the expert, but I would actually say I'm pretty good at connecting with people. Like I'm probably an unusual lawyer in that I am touchy-feely, and I'm okay with connecting people to my real life, you know, as like even my background, you know, like so I'm a little bit different. So I actually would feel worse if somebody attacks my, like I'm very uncomfortable if I'm not going to be liked, and it's hard to overcome. Like it's not all about credibility.
yeah. Yeah, Susan, remind me to send you the TQ.
Yeah.
Now I want to know what your TQ is.
Yeah, like I took one years ago. It's been a long time. I was just thinking about that.
We'll look it up. Good. Other questions? Lori, you're funny. Other questions or comments? All right. Trust in the PPE world. Neil, say more about that.
Okay, I'll just switch my video on as well. I'm in Hong Kong, so I was sort of half nodding off. It's 1 o'clock in the morning here,
Oh
so
my God. You get
I
the
woke up.
award for most, for like biggest effort to stay on this webinar.
Well, I'm normally awake late because I've been so my professional background is a little bit strange. So my background is investment banker, but I quit that 18 years ago. I own a chain of spas here in Hong Kong, which are all shut down because the government's had us closed for 140 days so far in the last 6 months. And I also teach psychology, and I teach trusted advisor. I actually liaised with Charlie Green years ago when I started doing this, but I teach all areas of business psychology to corporates, mainly to financial institutions because of my banking background. But likewise, that business was pretty much decimated last year. My revenue was down 80% because all the classrooms shut, and they're still all shut. So I do some online, but it's nowhere near replacing the volume of normal business that I had. And obviously, if I think about my job as, let's say, a business psychologist, it was very much around credibility. It was very much around reliability, about building relationships. So the numerator very much. But in the last 9 months, I set up a PPE trading business because obviously my main businesses were not doing anything and I had to survive. So I started dealing in masks and gowns. And then over the last 6 months, it's all been nitrile gloves. And never in my life have I seen a Wild West scenario like this, full of bandits and, you know, people scammers and people just trying to make a quick buck. And the absolute most important part of that formula, and to totally fly in the face of what you said, Noelle, and which is what woke me up, is it's all about self-orientation. And it's all about making sure that the other side understands that you're really, really trying not to lose the money. I'm extremely comfortable. Actually, I increase my credibility by saying, I don't know. I increase my credibility by saying, I cannot guarantee these things will arrive.
Yeah.
Because anybody who says they can are lying, because logistics around the world is a disaster. I mean, I knew nothing about this 9 months ago. I didn't know what a 40-foot container was. Okay. I didn't know what nitrile was. I knew nothing about this. I'd never heard of FOB or CIF or any of these Incoterms, none of it. Okay. And anybody who says they can tell you when something's going to arrive is lying, because ports are shut. People are literally turning up with suitcases full of cash to bribe their ways onto ships and kick other people off. So actually, you increase your credibility by saying, I don't know. And it's really about just getting people to understand that you are going to be professional and you're going to be honest, and focusing on the denominator of the equation. Everything else is secondary. And that's totally the opposite of what I've done professionally as an investment banker and as a business psychologist and as a business owner. It's the total opposite. I've had to totally pivot.
Well, it's good. And Neil, thank you for sharing that. It's, you know, it is important. And you're right. It's absolutely connected to the self-orientation, because anybody who's in a high credibility business, high expertise business, that's where the self-orientation gets wrapped up. And to be able to, I imagine that had to, I imagine that had to be really hard to get used to not having an answer when you don't have an answer, right?
Well, you just end up having to do it, you know, to use legal speak, a lot of carve outs. So whatever you're saying, you've just got to make sure that you really have your disclaimers. So I just fill everything full of disclaimers at a very early stage, because I don't want my integrity, which I've obviously built over 30 years as a banker and as a business owner, to suddenly get shot down in 6 months because somebody's promised they could deliver something and then they couldn't. And that's what's happening.
Yeah.
People are saying they can deliver product. They're getting people to wire large amounts of money over. And then that money is disappearing into China or Malaysia or Vietnam. And good luck getting your money back out of those legal systems.
Yeah.
And this is going on in the billions.
And those are bad actors, right? Those are people who are intentionally doing it, even in a situation. And it goes back to that mantra of knowing the truth is better than not knowing it, even if it's unintentional. I don't want to share the fact that there's no date. I don't know what the date is going to be. And it's not because I'm ignorant. It's because there is no way to know the date. That's the truth. That's not a limitation on yourself. It's the truth. There is no way to estimate when something's going to be available, or how much of it will be available, or whether or not the person's going to get it when it is available. We're dealing with that right now in the US around the vaccines, right? It's just really difficult because the information is literally not there. And lots of people have been making claims and promises. And now they're all having to walk that back because
everywhere in the world, in the world experiencing the same things.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So great point. Great. Thank you. Neil, if you're okay with it, I'll connect on LinkedIn because I'd love to follow up with you.
Sure,
And I'm going to send you a copy of the 20th anniversary book for being up at 1 o'clock in the morning listening to our webinar.
That's very kind. Thank you. I've
Thank
got
you
the
for
original
sharing.
one as well, so I look forward to seeing the differences.
Good. Awesome. All right. Other comments or questions? Anything? Okay. Well, we've gone, I thank you all for staying on 25 minutes long. What a great conversation. Thank you for jumping in and for sharing your thoughts and participating. And I look forward to seeing you all next month on February 10th at our webinar with Charlie Green and Robert Galford. All right. Have a great day, everybody, or good night. Take care.